So now I'm going to switch into part 2. Let me give a second here and take a little bit of water. So welcome again to stories, or rather, What's Up With That, UFOs, History and the Vedic View. This is section 2 where we're talking about the Vedic view. And the writings of ancient India, the Vedas, they have something to say about the whole phenomenon of what's off this planet and how it relates to what's on this planet. And the first thing I'd like to talk about here is the laws of karma, because the laws of karma have to do with, most people have a basic understanding about this, that whenever you do something that causes pain or suffering to someone else, then you wind up having to experience difficulty yourself. And this is not just an accident. There's, just like we have laws of physics, we have the laws of electronics and the laws of atomic energy and so on and so forth, the quantum physical laws, etc. The laws of karma work like that too. And the laws of karma are not just laws based on impersonal forces. They are mediated by a group of people. And those people are, we'll talk about them in a minute, the demigods, as we see here. So let's talk about the fact that the universe is not just gross matter. What scientists study are what the Vedas say are called gross elements. We have things that are earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and those are modernly termed as solid, liquid, gas, radiant energy, and the time-space fabric, or whatever else you want to call it. And this is not all there is. There's another element of actually also matter, but it's much more subtle than that. And this is called mind, intelligence, and false ego. These are 3 more subtle elements. And this is all still within the range of matter. We're not talking about anything spiritual yet. This is all still matter. And this is what accounts for many of the mysterious phenomenon that the scientists can't describe or discuss or understand. And I just recently saw a quote by Nikola Tesla, which he describes the idea of that when science actually begins to open up to a more subtle understanding at that time, they'll make more progress in 1 year than they've made all the previous time. Because it's this insistence on sticking within the box that keeps science within a certain level. Of course, not all scientists think that, and not all scientists who say that even think that, because they're part of a disinformation campaign. But at any rate, we have gross matter, then we have subtle matter, and we have this idea of control by sound or mantras. So this material world actually works at a more subtle level where by sound vibration, various material elements can be altered. Of course, we see that in various even scientific experiments. But deeper than that, the way the form actually is manifest in our world altogether, our 3D world, it has, and it comes from another kind of technology, a subtle technology that works with mantras. And it deals with these 24 elements of Sankhya philosophy that we'll be talking about in a minute. So these 24 elements of Sankhya philosophy are the elements that create what we call reality. But there are ways where we can actually play with this. Of course, not your everyday average person can do this, but if you do the right yogic techniques, then you can change the elements of the world around us, and in this way cause things to happen which normally would not be possible. So beyond the laws of karma, which are mechanical, but they are implemented by a group of people called the demigods. There's the Supreme Lord, and he is the one who causes the whole thing to work or not work. And he can, at his discretion, bypass or alter any of the workings that we've just been talking about, including, of course, what's happening here in this gross material world. So this is the next step here, this idea of the demigods. This is, of course, an ancient idea, and modern people naturally find this a very skeptical thing to be talking about in our modern 21st century. However, it's interesting that we have this idea that our world has been mediated or worked with by a group of people. And you find this in ancient India, and you find this in ancient Greece, and you find this in ancient Rome, you find this in China, you find this in Egypt, you find this in the Polynesians, you find this even in the Americas. And it's interesting that this is a worldwide phenomenon, that all the ancient cultures have this kind of understanding in the background of the ancient culture, that there were a group of people that they were interacting with that were very important, and they had the ability to do things to regulate the world that they saw. Now, of course, this gets us into the sort of ancient aliens territory, which, I appreciate that group bringing things to the fore. I don't exactly follow their whole entire understanding of things. However, the idea is that where are these demigods? Well, they don't live on Earth. They live off-world. Of course, modern science fiction has this theme quite commonly. You find this in a lot of modern science fiction, this idea of some kind of engineering race that lives somewhere in the universe, and they have something to do with how things manifest in this world. Well, in fact, that's true, but they're not advanced technologically in the way we think. We think in terms of rocket ships, and we think in terms of all kinds of things of that nature, atomic energy and quantum physics and this and that and the other. But there's the other technology that we hinted at just a minute ago, this technology of mantras, which doesn't require any of this stuff. There are ways to go from point A to point B without rocket ships. There are ways to affect the world without having to build machines to do it. Building machines to do it is a very crude way of doing it. And this is why we're talking about this idea of an alternative technology. So the way that the universe works is, it certainly has its mechanical elements. There's no doubt about it. And it certainly does usually respond in a very patterned and predictable way. But on top of it, augmenting the karmic system, are the demigods who engineer and regulate the karmic system. And as I generally tend to say it, that since we've seen this same group of people, sometimes with very strikingly similar characteristics, popping up in all these ancient cultures of our planet, whatever our ancestors were smoking, they must have been getting it from the same dealer. They were coming up with these same stories, So maybe there was such a group of people. Now, the question, of course, becomes, why don't we see them today? Well, the Vedas have an answer for that, and that is that at one time, people in this planet were very concerned with their relationship with the demigods, and they would perform various sacrifices to them. Of course, we learn in the Vedas that this is not necessary, that one can actually just develop a relationship with the Supreme, with God himself, and not have to worry about all these substratum of middle managers that organize the universe, and that's sufficient in itself. However, if one is not prepared to do that, then one can have a relationship with them. But as humans became more egotistical, self-centered, and focused on material goals, they lost their interest in the demigods, and therefore the demigods have no real interest in coming here and dealing with such a race of people. So therefore, they still manage things, but they don't actually interact with us on a face-to-face basis, which at one time they did. And it's interesting that if we look, we see Vedic temples, there were doors in the temples on, say, 100 feet off the ground. Now, who comes in the door of a temple 100 feet off the ground? The pagodas of China and some of the other Oriental areas also similarly have these entranceways in the top of buildings. Now, why would there be an entrance in the top of a building unless somebody was coming in that entrance? At any rate, these are not proofs in themselves, but they're indications that we are actually involved in a part of a family that's much bigger than we usually think. And not only there's a class of demigods, but the Vedas, as we'll talk about in other sessions to come later, there's a whole zoo of different types of human forms that are not what we think of as human, and not the demigods either, but are somewhere in between, that do other various things and exist in other various realms in our world, in our overall picture of the world, in the gross and subtle world that we were talking about a minute ago. So, just to finish up here, these are other technologies that are described in the Vedas, and we'll talk about them. We've talked about them already to some extent, as subtle matter and mantras. Vimanas are flying machines. They were even depicted in art many 1,000 years ago or more. And, of course, these kind of paintings are not that old, but still, we see this idea of flying machines, and in some cases, there are Vedic literatures which even describe the inner workings of these things, and they're not like the Greek idea of Icarus we talked about last week, where Icarus was flying into the sky, but he had wings that were made of wax, and of course, he got too close to the sun and his wings melted. This doesn't sound very practical. And of course it isn't, because the human body weighs too much to be lifted with the arm power that we have. However, these aren't describing anything like that. They're describing actual mechanical things, and in some cases more mystical things, because flying can be accomplished mechanically as we do today. It can also be accomplished using mystic means with mantras and other things, so that can be also done. And of course, the more superior way is in a mystical way. But even in the ancient writings, there's this word, vimana, flying machine. Why are people talking about such a thing if they weren't seeing them? And this gets in, and I'll finish this up really quick with the Sankhya philosophy here, where we have 24 elements. Here I only have listed 23 because the 24th element is sometimes in various places listed differently. But we have the 5 knowledge-acquiring senses, our eyes, our nose, our mouth, which tastes. We have our ears, which hear, and then we have the skin, tactile sensation. Then we have the working senses, which again are the tongue because it speaks, the arms which can lift, the legs which move, and the genitals and rectum. So these are the working senses, in other words, how we put ourselves out in the material universe. The knowledge-acquiring senses are the input senses, and the working senses are the output senses. Then we have the gross elements, which we talked about, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, or in modern terms, more solid, liquid, gas, radiant, and time-space continuum. Then we have the subtle elements, which are form, touch, taste, smell, and sound. So we don't hear just raw sense data. Sense data comes to us in a multiplex, in a collection of things. And these subtle elements are what help us to perceive the world. So this is a part of that. And beyond that, we have the mind, which is the instrument for regulation of what we focus our attention on. Intelligence, which is the understanding we have of the world around us, and the false ego, which is our identification with the external material world, which in fact we don't belong in. So these are 23 elements. The 24th element is sometimes the soul or the jiva, and sometimes the 24th element is described as time, or alternatively as the Supreme Lord. So these are all possible ideas for what the 24th element could be. So this kind of brings me to the end. Hi. Could you do me a favor and take your shoes off?
Oh, okay. I'm just stopped. You finished the lecture?
I'm just finishing right now, and then we're going to open up for questions. You can ask questions at this point. So okay. I didn't want to just do a thing where I rattle on for a while, but I wanted to. So please stay and ask some questions.
I have to put my stuff in storage. I was hoping just coming in to hear a little bit and then come back. But I want to ask you something.
Well, we're here every Thursday, and
same topic.
Well, we'll be doing this topic for the next few weeks.
Okay, so maybe I'll come. What time does it start?
7 o'clock, 7 to 8:30.
Right,
so
where
are we? Where are we at right now? We're almost at.
Do you have a scheduling?
Yeah, there's a little thing in that box there, and I'll give you one of my cards.
This one.
Yeah, hang on just a sec. No, the other one in the plastic thing that shows what's happening on each day.
What are your views on Vinyamas?
What's that?
Vinyamas. From the,
yeah, well, we were talking about that and a number of things.
Yeah, I mean, so some people actually replicated the science.
Yeah, I've heard those experiments.
Are you saying that with a tongue-in-cheek, or
no.
Are you seriously?
No, I've heard some of the experiments. I don't know how well that they run it, what they come up with, but it's impossible to keep track of everything.
Well, I mean, you do whether you know it or not.
Right.
It's just finding that space in your head. So next week, Thursday.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a meetup group that's called What's Up With That. So I'm eventually, I don't know why I haven't gotten around this. I'm going to do a, a WhatsApp group so that I can,
Not on any of that.
Yeah. Anyway, this is ways just to get the word out of when it's happening and what exactly topic we'll be discussing.
It's funny that you talk about that, because my theory is that the UFO, because a lot of people, did you ever read a book called The Day After Roswell?
No, I never read that book.
Okay, it's an interesting book because they talk about the interface of technology with UFOs, especially wireless technology and fiber optics. And how that proceeded into the society.
Right. There's a number of those kind of threads where people talk about how much of our modern technology was, at least apparently, gleaned from the retro engineering of the saucers that they got.
I'm reading something now that's even bigger than that. It's, talking about our reality itself as kind of like a holographic, projected, advanced civilization process. So our whole reality is one that is digitized, almost computerized.
Well, that's something we're talking about too, but a little bit on a different note. If you're willing to come next time or so, we'll talk about it.
I'm definitely interested.
What's your name, by the way?
My name is Garfield.
Garfield. And what's your name? Raina.
Thanks.
What is it?
Raina. Yes.
Raina. Okay, great.
Yeah,
All right.
so I'll see you next Thursday.
Okay, great. So, do you have any questions? Or there's a microphone there. If you could speak into that. That way, I'm recording this for YouTube. So anyone that says something, I couldn't get it up fast enough for him. Oh. How are you? Hare Krishna. So these are our working senses, and let me go back through this. This was the alternative technology. We'll be talking more about that in the future. The we assume that our world is the pinnacle of technology, that what we have today is the best that there is. But what the Vedas explain is that there's other ways to do the same thing. And they don't require machines, and they don't require maintenance, and they don't pollute the planet. There are other ways where you can travel, you can communicate with people far away, you can see what's going on far away. You know, we do use television and jumbo jets and computers to do that now, and telephones. But there's other ways to do it. And in the ancient times, they used to do it that way. And of course, this other technology is hinted at in some of these UFO encounters, because we see things happening that don't make sense from our modern scientific point of view. And that's why sometimes this whole idea of the Vedas, the whole idea of the UFOs and everything is so difficult for people, because it's connected with apparently things doing exhibiting phenomena that we can't explain according to our modern scientific understanding. So at any rate, this is our universal control with the demigods, and then the laws of karma, and the expansion of the universe. We talked about that briefly, and of course this was our earlier section about the various history of how UFOs came into our everyday world as a household word from something that was very mysterious at the very beginning, and how it became so stigmatized according to various scientific and military reasons and their purposes. So I think I'm going to cap it at this point, because we're closing in on an hour right now. I wanted to break it into smaller pieces. And you're welcome to stay, and we can talk informally as I break everything down, because I'm going to have to put everything away here. But we are here every Thursday at 26 2nd Avenue, which is the address, 26 2nd Avenue and East 1st Street, from 7 to 8:30. And this particular group of talks are called What's Up With That? And we're dealing with the paranormal, and specifically the subject of the paranormal we're dealing with is the UFOs, and their various aspects of them and how they relate to the ancient writings of India. All right, so the YouTube channel is called Krishna Was Up. If you go to YouTube, it's KRISHNAWAZZUP. That's on the card, the business card that I gave you, and it's also, you'll see it here on the YouTube. So thank you all very much. Hare Krishna.